From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Soini Gray. We begin in Ecuador, where Vice President Maria Alejandra Vicuña has denied accusations that she had asked for financial contributions during her term as a congresswoman. Vicuña says she's being blackmailed.
Vicuña in a press conference, he rejected this accusation and also accused of this accusation to Andrés Paz.
Here have evidence. Ecuadorians have to know that this is not coincidence. Since September, Mr. Sakbai has threatened to forge this statement if we don't meet the demand for charge, particularly as the governor of the Morona Santiago province, as provincial director of FtS. But as we didn't concede to this blackmail, pressure or extortion because we are committed to transparency, today the standards are made public.
A group of about 105 migrants have been deported from Tijuana and are heading back to Honduras. The migrants have reportedly abandoned their asylum requests for the United States and are now on their way back to their home country by plane. The Mexican commissioner of the National Migration Institute claims that the migrants are leaving voluntarily. Mexico's government says it will deport 500 migrants who tried to cross onto U.S. soil as U.S. border troops fired tear gas at them on Saturday.
The President of the United States is angry right now. If he dies of a heart attack, we will pay for it. That is why I'm leaving. I don't want to be an accomplice to that debt. I left a 5-year-old boy in Honduras, and I'll be happy because I'll see him, hug him, and never separate from him.
And Mexico's incoming foreign minister has said only a project the size of a post-World War II reconstruction effort could address the flow of migrants heading towards the United States. Marcelo Ebrard is due to meet U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Sunday. He says deporting migrants is not a solution to this crisis. He believes that the conditions that are causing them to flee their home countries must be addressed.
To regulate migration flows, first, there must be opportunities for migrants. We must promote development in their countries and respect people's rights. That's the objective of what we're promoting. With the United States, I will go with the general idea, but it's the same theory. We're trying to convince them to take part in our idea.
And members of the migrant caravan have made a series of demands to the Mexican and U.S. governments.
We request of President Donald Trump to accelerate the process of asylum in the United States, because everyone has the right to ask for political asylum, as my colleagues said, that a commission is formed by the new government of Mexico that comes to negotiate a presidential solution for those who want to stay here.
Today is when countries are needed to come to the rescue of all the migrants. We are suffering. We are not suffering because we want to. We need to bring our families forward. And what happened on Sunday was a peaceful march. Many people have their families back in Honduras, starving, and went out to work to feed them.
And a new migrant caravan is ready to depart from El Salvador to the United States. But this time, hundreds of Central American migrants are taking to social media to get some answers about the journey they're about to take.
I've been hearing about these caravans for quite some time. I've heard that 2 have left already. This one will be the 3rd. Another one is expected to leave later. Who knows how many more?
We are preparing ourselves because our country is in chaos. We are moving on enthusiastically, hoping we all arrive to the U.S.
And Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince has arrived in Argentina for the G-20 summit amid controversy over the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Prince Mohammed bin Salman landed in Buenos Aires after a visit to Tunisia, where he was received by protesters accusing him of murdering Jamal Khashoggi. Some nations are also calling on the Saudi coalition to end the military campaign in Yemen, which humanitarian crisis has worsened. The G20 Leaders Summit starts on Friday in Buenos Aires. The capital has been rocked by protests condemning the government and the International Monetary Fund, which they accuse of exporting poverty and starvation in their country.
We came here to tell the IMF, that International Looting Fund, that it doesn't matter how many police or prefecture or gendarme force they send. We know very well who the violent ones are. We know very well who are accountable for the looting, starvation and poverty in Argentina.
And staying with news from Argentina, the Supreme Court has rejected an appeal by the indigenous leader Milagro Sala against her detention. Sala has been in prison or under house arrest for most of the last 2 years in connection with several charges. This appeal related to the so-called eggs case, where she was accused of throwing eggs at the house of Geraldo Morales, the governor of Jujuy province. Sala says she wasn't even there that day and the cases against her are political persecution. Time for the first break of this newscast. More news in a minute.
With developing events being presented through analysis. Our coverage transcends borders. With renowned journalist Walter Martinez.
Salud amigos, tripulantes de nuestra querida, contaminada y única nave espacial.
Dossier. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Y ponga usted las cámaras, señor director.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Now to Venezuela, where President Nicolas Maduro has met the president of the North Korean Supreme Popular Assembly, Kim Jong-nam. Kim Jong-nam is on a Latin American trip and met with Venezuelan officials to strengthen economic and trade ties as well as diplomatic relations. The meeting took place following a tour of several sites around the capital city, guided by the Foreign Minister, Jorge Arreaza. And Kim Jong-nam visited the resting place of the former president Hugo Chavez, known as 4F. He paid tribute to Chavez at the Cuartel de la Montaña, accompanied by members of the National Constituent Assembly, and Adan Chavez, the brother of the late commander. Kim Jong-nam is also set to visit Cuba and Mexico during this tour. Brazilian President-elect Jair Bolsonaro has named a former army officer as the country's Minister of Infrastructure. Tarcísio Gomes de Freitas is a civil engineer who was trained at the Military Engineering Institute. On Monday, Bolsonaro named an army general as government secretary, and military personnel were also given ministerial posts in defense, institutional security, and science ministries. The president-elect says he expects to announce the rest of his cabinet by the end of this week. And members of the Brazilian Socialist Party are speaking out against the incoming government of Jair Bolsonaro and its recent comments against the Cuban doctors who were working in the country.
Members of the PSB in the country's lower house have made President-elect Jair Bolsonaro responsible for what is sure to be a tragedy for Brazilians once all Cuban doctors have left the country.
The lack of doctors in Brazil is now the responsibility of the president-elect. He's at fault for the Cuban doctors leaving. He is responsible for the thousands who will be left with no access to medical attention.
In a letter supporting the Cuban government's decision to pull out these doctors, members of the PSB also lamented the various positions of the incoming government.
The Cuban government made the right choice. These people came to help Brazil. They helped those less fortunate, those in rural areas, and then they were humiliated and attacked during Bolsonaro's campaign. The response by the Cuban government shows they will defend their dignity.
Over 28 million Brazilians were cared for by the Cuban doctors, who worked in the most vulnerable areas of the country, regions with low rates of human development.
The Cuban doctors took care of people. They felt people's pain and tried to find ways of resolving it. Brazilians felt this and valued the doctors' care. Brazilian doctors are often more concerned with money and their own living conditions, because medicine is a field for those with money.
Out of the 16,000 health experts who formed part of the More Doctors program, over 8,000 were Cuban.
Colombian students continue to march to push for increased funding for public universities. These students have been on a national strike for nearly 50 days. From all corners of the country, marchers are making their way to Bogota, where labor unions, social organizations, and indigenous movements will join forces for a rally against tax reform. This is the 7th time students have taken to the streets because of a breakdown in negotiations with the government. Students have condemned the use of excessive force by S-Man, which is Colombia's anti-riot squad, both along the march route as well as on campus. With a symbolic act, the 2-year anniversary of the signing of the peace agreement was celebrated in Colombia, but President Iván Duque, along with all members of his party, failed to attend the event, effectively turning their backs on all victims and veterans of the armed conflict.
The FARC political party celebrated the 2-year anniversary since the signing of the peace agreement with the government. Party members lamented the lack of guarantees from the government, which has led to the deaths of many social leaders and former fighters who believed in the agreement.
The incredibly high number of murdered social leaders and former soldiers is the best way of describing how little guarantees the government has provided for everyone.
The celebration's most emotional moment came from one of the victims of an attack at Club El Nogal. She spoke about forgiving her attackers after listening to the testimonies of guerrillas who truly believed the country could be changed through armed fighting.
The level of inequality along with impossible situations led them down that path. I choose to forgive them. We cannot continue walking down a path that leads to war.
The presence of former combatants and victims was contrasted with the absence of President Iván Duque and members of the Centro Democrático Party, who have openly talked about undoing the peace agreement. The former member of the government's peace delegation to Havana, Cuba, Roy Barreras, reminded attendants that peace is not a political issue.
We have the responsibility to uphold the agreement as a right. To say peace is a political issue, depending on the government. Is to say that there can be no peace where there is no government.
The United Nations has also warned about the Colombian government's failure to maintain guarantees agreed upon.
The process of reintroducing former fighters back into society has been too slow, and many former combatants remain deeply worried about their own safety. Victims instead continue waiting for the funds they were offered.
FARC party members, opposition senators, victims and international delegations repeated their commitment to peace and called on President Duque to uphold guarantees and maintain the peace agreement.
There's news that the murdered Chilean Mapuche leader Camilo Catrillanca had been under surveillance since 2017. According to an investigation carried out by the by the Center for Journalistic Research, Catrillanca had been monitored since last year by the Carabineros Intelligence Service. He was shot last November 14, sparking outrage and protest due to the abuses Mapuches continue to suffer by the Chilean state. The proposed tax reform in Costa Rica continues to move towards approval despite the ongoing national strike that has lasted for over 2 months. Our correspondent in San Jose, Fernando Francia, has more.
Gracias, un gusto saludarte. Costa Rica sigue debatiendo.
Costa Rica is still debating tax reform and how to apply legal frameworks to best deal with the fiscal crisis in the country. The Legislative Assembly is debating the reforms, but they're still waiting for all the reports they need to reach a decision. For 78 days, there have been national strikes against tax reform. Several educational institutions are demanding better treatment ever since the Education Ministry announced new austerity measures. For example, there are 2,400 teachers from schools across the country facing redundancies because they're not part of next year's educational plan.
Still in Peru, the country says it's ready to host the 2019 Dakar Rally next January. It will be the first time the competition will be held in just one country. The competition's top drivers attended the Peruvian embassy in Paris to hear the latest details. The 10-stage course is due to be 5,000 kilometers long, and 70% of the course is on land. And for the first time, a Peruvian woman will participate in the Dakar Rally. 24-year-old Gianna Velarde will take part in the motorcycle race. Now, this is a triumph for Velarde, who is a cancer survivor. She says this heralds the beginning of a new chapter of her life. And we're going to take a short break now. More news after this.
With developing events being presented through analysis. Our coverage transcends borders. With renowned journalist Walter Martinez.
Salud, amigos, tripulantes de nuestra querida, contaminada y única nave espacial.
Dossier. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Y ponga usted las cámaras, señor director.
Welcome back. At least 22 people have been killed in an explosion near a chemical factory in northern China. Another 22 were injured, and around 50 vehicles were set on fire when a truck carrying a combustible chemical exploded. The blast took place in the city that will host the 2022 Winter Olympics. And Australia's largest city, Sydney, has seen its streets turning into rivers after a month's worth of rain fell in just 2 hours. The authorities have asked that commuters stay home as trees are likely to come down and outages are expected. At least 2 storm-related fatalities have been confirmed. Venezuelan Vice Minister Yuri Pimentel visited Kenya, where he met with the United Nations Human Settlements Program to speak about Venezuela's housing mission, which has benefited more than 2 million nationals. The minister was greeted in Nairobi by a Kenyan youth group who sent this message of support and solidarity to the Bolivarian Revolution.
Viva Venezuela, viva! Viva! Viva Maduro, viva! Viva! Viva Chavez, viva! Viva! Viva, viva, viva! Viva! Viva Kenya, Venezuela, friendship, viva! Viva!
People in Benai in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo have demonstrated against the murder of civilians. Military sources say that 6 civilians were killed in the last attack by the ADF armed group on Tuesday. The Army and UN peacekeeping troop began a joint operation against the group. 2 weeks ago, but violence is sparking outrage in the area as December elections approach.
The public figures of the city of Beni have chosen today's day to express their dissatisfaction and say no to the massacres. We want to see the international community through MONUSCO put an end to these massacres, so that MONUSCO can liberate our city. They didn't come to Beni just to flower the city of Beni. We want to see them work to impose peace.
The South African opposition leader Julius Malema has officially brought criminal charges against the country's Minister of State Enterprises. The charges against Minister Pravin Gordhan include corruption, racketeering, perjury, money laundering, and many others. Gordhan has described the allegations against him as baseless, fake, and an attempt to derail his efforts to fight corruption in state-owned companies. Senegal's culture minister has called for the reinstitution of all of Senegal's artwork from France, this following a French report urging the return of African art treasures. The minister wants to ensure that every piece of artwork owed to them is promptly returned.
If they have decided to return these works permanently, we will find ways to recover them. If they have decided on another form of restitution, deposit or loan, we are ready to find solutions with France. We know we have works there, but I don't know the number. But if we have 10,000, we'd like to have the 10,000.
The European Court of Justice is to rule on whether the United Kingdom can reverse its decision to leave the European Union. Lawyers representing a group of Scottish members of Parliament actually, have dragged the British government before the court. British parliamentarians are set to vote on the Brexit deal early next month. A court in Crimea has ordered 12 of the 24 Ukrainian sailors captured by Russia to be detained for 2 months. The sailors face a charge of illegally crossing Russian borders, which carries a sentence of up to 6 years in prison. Ukraine says that they were traveling in shared waters on the routine passage to the Sea of Azov, which they have a right to patrol under a bilateral treaty, but Russia disagrees. Syria is celebrating its culture with a 7-day festival paying a special tribute to the Syrian Arab Army's defeat of terrorism.
It's the 60th anniversary of Syria's culture ministry, so the cream of the country's literary, art and music scenes are to be honoured for their work. The awards will be accompanied by a host of festivities.
Celebrations will showcase our multiculturalism. We are also celebrating a year in which the Syrian Arab Army has made great strides in its fight against terrorism, restoring security to many areas.
So this year's celebrations include paying tribute to the Syrian Arab Army who have fought to preserve Syria's rich culture and character. Those in attendance have shown solidarity with the soldiers in their fight against extremists.
Syria has won, and with this victory, so has our culture. A culture of life over death, of peace against war. We can proudly say this through our art.
In the celebration, we are sending a message to say that Syria is returning back to normal. We have won, and our ancestral culture has beaten terrorism, extremism, and ignorance.
Syria is considered a cradle of civilization. This war hasn't been able to erase thousands of years of history and diversity. This is a celebration of victory, and never before has art and culture been so symbolic.
The French government will be meeting with Yellow Vest protesters following last week's fuel protests. The Minister of Ecological and Solidarity Transition says that the government wants to open a space for debate after meeting with representatives from the protests. For their part, a spokesperson for the Yellow Vest say that they want to hold a meeting with the Prime Minister present. Meanwhile, new demonstrations are being planned for Saturday.
I told them that we wanted to create a place for debate, discussion and expression so that everyone could express themselves, that all points of view could of course be heard. They also expressed a desire to be received by the government as a whole.
We end in Lebanon, where climate change is threatening Lebanon's symbolic cedar trees. As temperatures rise and rain and snowfall decreases, tiny insects are eating away at the tree's pine needles. Up to 600 larvae per square meter have been found. To address this environmental concern, the government has launched a program to replant 40 million trees. And we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at tellusyourenglish.net. Join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Sweeney Gray. Thank you for watching.